What's up? Welcome back to the Metalhead Car Show. With the recent American election wrapping up, I had this idea of a video that nobody asked for, and that was, what are the coolest cars from each presidential era? Now, the way we'll be doing this, I'm going to be doing it just based on the era itself, not actually the term. So for someone like Barack Obama, who ran for 2 terms in a row, I'm only going to be looking at one car for those 2 terms. And obviously, American cars only. We'll be starting with JFK just simply due to my knowledge of cars kind of dwindles past that era, and we'll be looking at 13 cars anyway, and that is plenty. So, enough dawdling, let's get right into it. Starting with John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy ran in 1961 and ended up no longer president in 1963, and my choice for that era is very inappropriately the 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible. Hear me out. Now, yes, I know exactly why that's an extremely controversial choice for this, but frankly, that car is super cool. It's a full-size American car that's convertible that has suicide doors on it. I know why some people might not like this answer, but honestly, it is such a cool car, I couldn't not pick it. And for whatever it's worth, my second place car for this entry is the 1963 Corvette split window. Moving on to Lyndon B. Johnson. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson ran from 1963 to 1969, which frankly is like one of the greatest era of American cars, but also made for one of the trickiest eras to actually pick an American car. There is a lot of very good choices in this, but the one I'm going with is the 1965 427 Shelby Cobra. This is very much an era of get as much power into the car as possible and worry about handling later. And this is no exception. You have an extremely high-powered big block V8 shoehorned into this tiny little British sports car, flared out a little bit to fit fat tires on it so you could almost control it, and send it away. And that is so cool. Like, it was one of the fastest cars on the planet at this time, and definitely one of the sketchiest. Maybe not the sketchiest, but it weighed 2,500 pounds. It almost made 500 horsepower. That's a lot to deal with. Let's be real, weak tires and suspension. There's no way I couldn't make the Shelby Cobra the winner, but as a runner-up, I need to say the 1968 426 Hemi Charger. It's arguably the most badass car ever made. I like the 68s a lot more than the 69 or 70. To say about the 68 just looks fantastic. But great era for cars, lots to pick from. Next we have Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon ran from 1969 to 1974, which is a very okay time for American cars. You still had 1969, 70, and 71 that made some absolute bangers, but this is where things started to drop off a little bit. Nonetheless, this is a very easy pick, and it's the 1969 426 Hemi Dodge Daytona. The Dodge Daytona was a NASCAR legend, just destroying records. It was the first car to do 200 miles an hour by itself, no drafting, and it was the first aero car with that outrageous spoiler on it. Ford tried to keep up with the Torino King Cobra, but they couldn't have that ready in time by the time NASCAR canceled the aero car program, leaving it all to Dodge and Plymouth. Now, despite Plymouth made the Superbird, which is pretty much the same car, all things said and done, I'm saying the Dodge Daytona because this just has more of a legend to it. As when Plymouth made about 2,000 Superbirds, Dodge made 500 Daytonas. Or that's what they claimed. The rumor of the Daytona was they actually made 250 cars, but when NASCAR came to count them, they rolled all 250 cars past them and then started to line up again and rolled the same 250 cars past again just to show that there was 500 cars. Is that true? No idea, but it's a pretty cool story. And a runner-up to this would definitely need to be the 1969 Boss 429 Mustang. For the exact same reason the 68 Charger went in, it's just one of the most badass muscle cars ever. Despite having brakes and suspension that was made for a car with less power and less weight, and this Mustang was actually a mess, it's super cool. Next we go to Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford ran from 1974 to 1977, and this is right when American cars were in a oil crisis and they were making some pretty weak cars, all things said and done. But nonetheless, the answer to this came very quickly at the 1977 Big Block 403 Trans Am. I don't think I need to explain this one much. It's the 77 Trans Am. It is the Smokey and the Bandit car. the black and gold T-top shaker hood scoop Trans Am. This wasn't a strong era for American cars, and despite I quickly got the Trans Am as my answer, it didn't make that much power. It wasn't that fast, all things said and done, but they are like one of the coolest American cars ever made. And for my runner-up, I'm going to go with a guilty pleasure and say the King Cobra 5-liter Mustang II. It was pretty much what the Trans Am did, but Mustang and a lot less power. It's a guilty pleasure car. I know it's not great. Deep down, I kind of want one, but not really. I can't really defend it that much. King Cobra Mustang II. Next, we go to Jimmy Carr. Jimmy Carr ran from 1977 to 1981, and frankly, it's not the strongest set of years for American cars, but we were quickly getting out of that. This is the last kind of entry I filled in, and again, there isn't that much to pick from, but what I'm picking is the 1979 Mustang Pace Car. Might seem like a weird pick, but hear me out. The 1977 Mustang was the first Mustang on the Fox body platform, and the Pace Car itself actually had a pretty unique engine at the time. Now, despite the Mustang GT at the time was using a pretty underpowered 5-liter V8, the Pace Car was actually using a 2.3-liter turbo 4-cylinder, making about 190 horsepower. Now, this was used again later on in the SVO Mustang, but the 1979 Pace Car was first. I'm giving it to this because it was kind of the first step forward in technology, showing that no replacement for displacement is kind of a bullshit term, and this was a way of making really efficient horsepower. It just didn't sound as good. But for my runner-up, I'm going to go a bit weird and say the 1981 Corvette. Honestly, I like these Corvettes. I think the flared out bodies and the just stupid plastic bumpers look awesome. Just if they actually made power. Next up, we're going to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan ran from 1981 to 1989, and this is where American cars started to kind of pick themselves back up a little bit. And the car we'd be going with is the 1987 Buick GNX. Now, this is based off the Regal platform, but the GNX had that turbo 6-cylinder in it, and it made like about 300 horsepower. Now, you might say 300 horsepower isn't that impressive, but two things you got to keep in mind. One, Chevy is really pushing for the Corvette to be the ultimate car from GM, despite it made notably less power. So they actually had to lie about the Grand National and GNX's power output because it made more power than the Corvette. And the second point is, almost no American cars were actually making this much power, and this thing could put that power down. You can actually find some comparisons of the Grand Nationals versus Countaches, and the Grand Nationals being able to launch way harder than the Countach, and ultimately being faster at a quarter mile. These things were doing quarter miles like low 14s, high 13 seconds range, which A, that's not slow. B, that was really fast for its time. Context, the SVO Mustang I mentioned earlier, being ahead of the game and making more power than some of the V8s, was doing like a mid 16 second quarter mile. And like the 5-liter GTs weren't that much faster. And also, the Grand National is like one of the most sinister American cars ever made. It's so goddamn cool. As for the runner-up, I'm actually going to give it to the GTA Trans Am. I've always had a thing for Trans Ams. I would love to actually have them one day. It's something I'm kind of looking into for the spring. But the GTA just looked a lot cooler than the rest. They had a special hood, they had the gold snowflake wheels, and just the burgundy color that a lot of them came in, again, just looked cool, which is what this whole list is about. Next up, we have George Bush Sr. George Bush Sr. ran from 1989 to 1993. And this one came so quickly because I couldn't not pick the Vector W8. Now, the Vector W8 was America's first supercar. It used a stroked-out Chevy small block with 2 turbochargers attached to it that made about 630 horsepower. It was just such a kind of funny car. It had a rear end that was set up for a grip, so it had a like drag-style setup rear end, but also it had a front end that was heavily themed off F1 cars. So the front end was built for handling, the rear end was built for grip. So I would actually love to see how these things handle. But the front end was also made of like all truck parts, like really heavy duty truck parts, like NASCAR parts to some extent. So it was made to be extremely durable. They used a 3-speed transmission because they knew that transmission could actually take the torque and power from that engine. They used a Chevy small block because you could just beat on it all day and it would just keep working. And that's just the whole car. And also, look at it. This thing is insane from every single angle. and there's no American car like it. There's no car like it. You can say Countach is, but they're not. Like, it's such an incredible machine. I couldn't not give it this position immediately. And a runner-up for this time, I'm going to give it to the Dodge Stealth Twin Turbo. Now, yes, it was a refaced Mitsubishi, but I don't care. These things looked awesome. They made great power for its day. Again, they're making like 325 horsepower for early 90s America. 1993, a Mustang was making 245 horsepower at its best. The Camaro was making like 230. The Corvette was making 300. Like, this was a big deal. And yeah, it's mostly Mitsubishi, but also it bears the Dodge badge. It looks awesome. I'm giving the runner-up spot to that. Next up we have Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton ran from 1993 to 2001, and there is a number of really awesome cars to pick, but the one I went with is the sketchy choice and the really early RT10 Dodge Viper. For the most part, the Mustang stayed the same forever, the Corvette stayed the same forever, had the same formula forever. The Dodge Viper was one of these things that pushed Dodge into a direction it's never been before. At that point, they've really never made a sports car before. They've never dealt with an engine that big before. They've never made something that crazy before. No trunk, no roof, no door locks, no door handles on the outside of the car, no side windows, no safety features, and it might spin out at any moment. Dodge made this in collaboration with Carroll Shelby. They used a modified Magnum truck engine, which is an 8-liter V10, and cranked up to 400 horsepower, and fitted it to a manual transmission. The interiors are kind of garbage, but if you maintain them, they kind of last forever. And again, they're cars that make you rubberneck whenever you actually see one. This one I went back and forth on between a few cars, and frankly, even when I narrowed it down to a Viper, I went back and forth on a few Vipers, but it has to be the RT10 original Dodge Viper. Moving on to George Bush Jr. George Bush Jr. ran from 2001 to 2009, which again gave me the chance to look at a lot of awesome American cars. This is when not just a lot of American cars, but a lot of car companies are really stepping their game up and making some really cool machines. But it came pretty quickly to me. The car I'm going with is the 2005 Ford GT. Now, the 2005 Ford GT came out for the Ford's 100th anniversary, and they made a homage to the original Ford GT40 using a 550 horsepower supercharged 5.4 liter V8 and making just one of the most stunning American cars ever. But people all said they're awesome on the track, they handle power really well, and they're really stable at high speeds. They may have some inconvenient doors, but honestly, the doors are kind of what makes it really cool. This is a really easy pick. There's a lot of amazing cars as runner-ups. I'm going to give it to the Corvette ZR1 as a runner-up, but no real reason. It's fast, it looks great, it makes so much power for the dollar, but as a winner, I need to give it to the Ford GT. Next up, we have Barack Obama. Barack Obama ran from 2009 to 2017, and again, this is an easy one, no debate. It has to be the Dodge Challenger Hellcat. I remember rumors of the Hellcat coming out. What they were saying at first was it would be a new car called the SRT Banshee, and it was going to be making the SRT Barracuda, and it was going to be making about 670 horsepower on a supercharged V8, and that's kind of the rumor that's floating around, and like an Alfa Romeo is going to follow its footsteps or something. But what we got was the Hellcat, a 707 horsepower, 6.2 liter V8 muscle car that was one of the best bang for the buck muscle cars ever. This thing was actually so popular that they actually had to take people from the Viper team to go build Hellcats faster because they could barely keep up with demand. And Vipers are also selling bad at this time. Unfortunately, the Hellcat has left us, but it's going to be the new Mopar engine legacy. For a long time, it was the 426 Hemi. I think that's generally been replaced with the Hellcat because it's that goddamn cool. And as a runner-up, I'm going to give it to the GT350R Mustang. If you're wondering why Camaro hasn't been mentioned, I don't hate Camaro, it's just there's cooler. Anyway, the GT350R had that incredible 5.2 liter flat plane crank V8. It revved to like 8,200 RPM, made 100 horsepower per liter, and it was a wicked track car. And like one of the best sounding Mustangs ever. But as awesome as they are, I really needed to give it to the Hellcat. Next up we have Donald Trump. Donald Trump ran from 2017 to 2021, and again, there was a lot of wicked cars this time, but the one I had to land on was the Ford GT. Again. But unlike the first Ford GT, this one was completely different. Unlike being made to kind of be a homage to the OG Ford GT40, this thing was a race car converted for the road. It didn't use a big V8, it used a twin-turbo 3.5-liter V6 and made about 630 horsepower, but this thing was fast. Like, you can find some videos of it doing drag races with Dodge Demons, and it's smoking the Demons, despite the Demon was made to be a drag car. And you can find some videos of just silly people trying to race a Cybertruck against the Ford GT, and the Cybertruck had it for a second. The Ford GT got traction and then just flew past. This thing also had just so much lore to it of people trying to sell them, but Ford actually sold them to people as long as they promised they're actually going to drive these things and they're going to get used, and they couldn't actually sell the car for an X period of time. And you had to have a couple awesome Fords to begin with. Like, it had that Enzo kind of vibe to it in regards of who was allowed to buy a Ford GT. These things are wicked. They're shit on a little bit at first because they had a V6, but I think once they actually got moving, that didn't matter anymore. Just if they weren't $1 million to go buy one. Next we have Joe Biden. Joe Biden started running in 2021. His term will be up in 2025. Again, a lot of cool things came out this time, but I had to give it to the Corvette Z06. This being on the CA platform, the Corvette Z06 is just that one step up. It used that wicked 5.5-liter flat-plane crank V8 that sounded like a Ferrari, but made like 675 horsepower, making just one of the most vicious track weapons Chevy's ever made from the Corvette line. Now, the current president-elect is Donald Trump, and you can't really go into this era just because it hasn't happened yet. And what I mean by that is, none of these cars have come out, so we can't really pick anything. So what we're going to do is talk about the car I'm most looking forward to seeing. That is the GTD Mustang. But the GTD Mustang is that one step up. Much like the GT500 being a track weapon supposed to burnout car, this is the track weapon Mustang. Inboard suspension, carbon ceramic brakes, like 800 plus horsepower, a spoiler that's built onto the chassis. Like, this thing is wild, and people complain that it was like $320,000, but honestly, it's probably worth it. People are going to pay that for an AMG GTR or whatever they cost. This is probably just as fast. And honestly, Ford's shooting really high at European competition for this Mustang. Some people say it's not worth it, but the people who say it's not worth it can't afford one, so let's see what the car can do next year. But anyway, I want to know, what do you think? Is there anything you strongly agree or disagree with from my list? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, subscribe, enjoy what you've seen. I tend to post a couple times a week, and I'll see you later.